Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the special launch of our documentary, New Ways of Teaching. My name is Graham Stanley, and I'm the British Council's English Programmes Lead for the Americas. So welcome to the launch of the British Council America's New Ways of Teaching documentary. This 30-minute documentary film has been made to showcase some of our work in English programmes in the region and features three of our projects: Sabal en Inglés, Language for Resilience, and Coding for Kids. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's panelists, who will be speaking a little bit more about these projects and some of the other work that we do. So our first panelist is Laura Baragan Montagna. Laura is currently Director of Education and Society, British Council of Columbia. She holds a master's degree in education from Harvard University and 2 summa cum laude undergraduate degrees in history and in literature from Los Angeles University in Bogota. Some of her previous posts include Education Advisor for the Office of High Commissioner for Peace and Director of Quality Insurance for Preschool, Elementary and Secondary Education in the National Ministry of Education. She has worked as a high school teacher and undergraduate teacher, was CEO of the Historical Footprints Foundation, and has worked as a consultant for NGOs such as Fundación Compartir, Empresarios para la Educación, and Facing History and Ourselves. Welcome, Laura.
Good morning, Graham, to you, to everyone else. Happy to be here.
And our second panelist is the British Council's Country Director for Argentina, Robert Chatfield. Robert was born in the UK and has worked as a teacher and latterly a teacher trainer in countries such as Poland, India, Spain, and Argentina. He has a postgraduate diploma in English teaching for adults, and after moving into management, an MBA from the University of Bath. After a career in healthcare in the United Kingdom, managing a company that provided specialist services for disabled patients, Rob returned to Argentina and joined the British Council in 2016, managing the remote teacher in Buenos Aires, which provides English classes to over 30,000 Uruguayan children every day. Rob is now the country director for Argentina and remote teaching lead for the Americas. Welcome, Rob. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce Liliana Sanchez. Liliana is the program lead for the Remote Teaching Center at the British Council Argentina, with a focus on Plan Sabal Uruguay. Liliana has worked in education management, course and materials design, standardization of assessment and criteria, validation of training programs, counseling and coaching of English language teaching professionals, provision of academic solutions and tailor-made academic services. She's a former Cambridge English Language Assessment Delta Module 2 assessor, and Liliana holds an MA in TESOL from Canterbury Christ Church University in the UK, and her main interests are teacher education, management, and leadership. Welcome, Liliana.
Thank you very much, Graham.
Now, before we watch the first clip from the documentary, I would like to ask my panelists a question that perhaps the audience can also reply to in the chat. What for you comes to mind when you hear the term new ways of teaching? Laura, would you like to answer this first?
Sure, happy to, Graham. So first of all, again, good morning to everyone who is logging in online. I'm thrilled to be here with such wonderful colleagues and panelists. And to answer to your question, obviously the first thing that springs to mind has to do with the context and the fact that we have been trying to survive for over 2 years this pandemic, and how from one moment to the other, the entire education sector had to change its way of teaching, and what that implied for teachers, for students, for parents, for families. And of course, it also makes me think about technologies, both old and new. So in many cases, in Colombia, as I'm sure happened in other countries, internet was not an option. So how we had to use old technologies like the radio, TV, or just simple WhatsApp to try to get kids into what could resemble a school. And last but not least, perhaps all the challenges, but also some good things that experience have left us. Perhaps we will be able to talk more about it later on.
Thank you, Laura. Now, turning to Rob, the same question to you, Rob. What comes to mind when I say new ways of teaching for you?
Hi, Graham. Thanks, and hi to everybody, whoever's watching out there around the Americas. For me, there's a number of things come to mind. I think, firstly, what's been really exciting about what's happened in the pandemic, and of course I'm aware the pandemic is a terrible thing that has had massive impact, but what it's done is it's forced us to innovate in education systems, in schools, and it's not only from the perspective of the teacher, it's not only the teachers finding new ways of teaching, the students have had to find new ways of learning. They've had to shift the way that they consume education. Obviously, there's been a massive digital revolution, but it's, I believe in a way, even though of course, at one point during the pandemic, there were around 1 billion children out of education, that the changes that have happened in education systems worldwide will actually fast track a lot of the things that the world needs in terms of education systems.
Thank you, Rob. And then finally, Liliana, what about you? New ways of teaching, what do you think of when you hear that?
Thank you, Graham, and hello, everyone in America, some of my colleagues. Well, basically for me, after having heard what my colleague said, it's really keeping with the flux. Learning is in constant change. We knew that. We knew that before the pandemic. But with the pandemic, we were forced to accelerate everything we did to adapt to changes. So really what we're doing right now, responding to learners' needs and also institutional needs, is in fact new ways of teaching. And I want to quote something that one of the people in the audience have said, Danielle said, it's finding solutions and enhancing opportunities. Definitely. And a lot of people have said innovation, innovative answers. And that's exactly what for me is new ways of teaching.
Great, thank you. Yes, Liliana, thank you. And turning to the chat, we have Julio Cesar, which says who says innovative, and Elianis, innovation in context, adaptation. What else do we have? Danielle Selal says, new ways of teaching for me is about finding out and trying to fulfill the needs of students so they have enhanced opportunities to learn. And then Abna, new ways of teaching involves learning new technology and discovering capabilities of learning depending on ages. So lots more there. I encourage you all to keep an eye on the chat. And we also have a special section for Q&A, question and answers. So if you have any questions and answers as the webinar goes on for our panelists, then please put them there rather than the chat. That will help us find them more easily. So I think, as everyone can see, new ways of teaching means different things to different people. But what unites all of us is the feeling that new approaches and solutions are needed for the challenges we face. And that's one of the reasons we have produced this documentary, to highlight some of the innovations that have been adopted in the Americas in particular, which we hope will be an inspiration for educators in the region and beyond. So now, it is my pleasure to present the first video clip of the documentary, where you will see featured the Sabal en Inglés project in Uruguay.
En el Uruguay, en el año 2007.
In Uruguay, in 2007, there was a law for education that was a piece of legislation that was voted for education, which indicates that children starting fourth grade in primary school are entitled to learning a foreign language through different meetings between teachers or amongst teachers throughout the country. It was decided that this foreign language was to be English. I am Emma. I am Uruguayan. I was born in Salto, the city of Salto. My name is Florencia Ramos. I'm 28. I was born in the southern area of the province of Buenos Aires, Lanús, and I'm responsible for quality and professional development in British Council, Argentina. I'm also a remote English teacher. I have been working as a teacher for 22 years already. I have always been motivated by the teachers I had as a kid. When I had the opportunity to follow my studies, I decided to become a teacher. I am an English teacher as part of the Plan Ceibal. The program design for Ceibal in English indicates that two teachers need to be involved. One of them is a remote teacher who knows English, who speaks English, is an English teacher, understands a second language acquisition, and on the other hand, a general classroom teacher who does not speak English. Many limitations faced by the remote teacher because of not being physically present in the classroom can be worked out by the face-to-face teacher. Ceibal in English is a program that seeks to educate children in the use of English as a foreign language, and it also grants opportunities to access, use, and to build skills in technology platforms, etc. So we have digital material based in this class plan, and then we adapt it to the needs of each group. The next step is to use the video conferencing system available in our remote learning center, and that is where the magic begins, showtime. Ceibal in English was a different opportunity to access through a screen someone that was far removed physically, but having the face-to-face teacher enabling this closeness. So there are different classes involved. Class A is imparted by the remote teacher via screen platforms, and then there is the other, the Class B, which is handed by the face-to-face teacher. So the classroom teacher only needs to reinforce the learnings that were imparted by the remote teacher, like, for example, working on pronunciation. These classes are a lot of fun to me. I learn a lot, apart from what I learned with Florencia. So I really enjoy the Ceibal classes. I really like the class missions. I love the missions because they are fun. It's a way of learning things that is fun, and I like learning things this way. Hello, Emma's dad. Thank you for joining the challenge, and challenge teacher Juan. Show us your magic card. This is my magic cards. What about yours?
Thank you. That was the first video clip from our documentary, New Ways of Teaching, which is 30 minutes long, and we'll shortly be sharing the link to the actual documentary webpage, the documentary will be available later today. What I'd like to do now is call upon Liliana Sanchez, who is the program lead for the British Council in Uruguay, leading for us on the Ceibal project, the Ceibal Inglés project. Now, Liliana, you have been working very closely with Ceibal on the remote teaching of the children there in the country. What do you think are the most innovative aspects of this project?
Thank you very much, Graham. Well, for those who are not familiar with the program, remote teaching with Ceibal was a teaching modality for remote teaching center that we call the RTC in Argentina, long before the pandemic. And so for us, remote teaching was not a quick response to the world's health crisis in 2020. And as you heard it from Gabriela Kaplan, head of Ceibal in English, in the video clip, the Ceibal English program is part of a larger initiative of the government of Uruguay, which in 2017 decided that English was a foreign language to be taught in upper primary in schools in Uruguay. So as for us, the RTC, the people teaching from the RTC, the mode of teaching remotely is the norm, is what we do every day. But certainly because of pandemic, our partner Ceibal and us needed to adapt to the response to the emergency that we were living. And now we're using lessons learned to keep up and keep improving and innovating. In our context of remote teaching, the innovative part is that we do collaborative teaching. The collaborative act involves, as you heard it in the video, two key elements, the remote teacher and the class teacher, and together they run the lesson. So as for your question in a specific, Graham, one of the most innovative aspects, according to me and my experience working at the RTC, is that the concept of the classroom has changed, and we have changed it substantially. It is really thinking outside the box, and that's what remote teaching does for us. We provide equal opportunities to learners because we reach learners in primary schools in Uruguay who otherwise would not get will not get the opportunities to learn English, basically. And I'm glad to say that the teaching service that we provide from the Remote Teaching Center Argentina is of the highest quality. And this leads me to another very key innovative aspect of the program, and it's our teacher development. From the start of the program, British Council Argentina has strived to help remote teachers develop and keep up with the professional demands of teaching remotely, and doing it in a way that is motivating and engaging for learners. We have Emma, for example, the little girl in the clip. Her language teacher, Flor, in coordination with Juan, the classroom teacher, they work together in team teaching to help Emma succeed. And most importantly, and I invite you to keep on watching the documentary, you will hear how Emma dreams high. And because of remote teaching, she will most likely achieve what she wants. And it is very encouraging to hear little kids talk about English and how English opened, possibilities for them. So that's basically what I think is quite innovative of our program.
Thank you very much, Liliana. Now, you mentioned teacher development. Perhaps I could ask you a follow-up question about that. What kind of skills do remote teachers require that are different from the kind of skills that is required of a teacher to take face-to-face? I know you could talk a long time about this, but just briefly, what are a couple of things that you think are different and that teachers need development for?
Sure. First of all, I want to say that, there has been a lot of discussion about the transferable skills from the traditional classroom to remote teaching. And so, that in terms of professional development, for example, at the RTC Argentina, we continue to focus on those areas, like, for example, making sure that meaning is conveyed clearly and things like that. But in particular, in remote teaching, we have got a set of skills that through experience, we have identified as key for remote teaching. And these are, for example, classroom management at a distance. There's something very important in our program, if I may clarify. This is one teacher in Argentina, the classroom teacher who doesn't necessarily speak English or knows how to teach English in Uruguay, and all the students together in the classroom, receiving lessons via a conference system. So that's quite innovative already. And so the skills that the teacher requires is, number one, is collaborative teaching is at the core of this program. Telepresence, for example. Some people would say, well, anybody can open a camera and teach. And that's what a lot of people try to do during pandemic. And we know that it is not just that. It's not just transfer the context of a classroom to a digital environment. Remote teachers need to know how to communicate clearly, how to use their voice clearly, especially when being transmitted digitally. They also need to know, for example, about the body language. What conveys meaning when there's another teacher helping you and collaborating at the other end. So we have got a lot of skills. These are just the key skills that I would like to emphasize for people attempting or trying to move now permanently to a remote classroom or remote context. Work on those aspects. Telepresence is important. It's not something that just smiling and getting, dressing up for your class and, putting on your best clothes does it. It requires a lot of skill. And that's what we do at the Remote Teaching Center. We focus on specific needs, on specific demands. We do a lot of reflective teaching we discuss, do peer observation, just as you would do in the classroom, but we do it remotely. And so it is a challenging context, not an impossible one to work at, but certainly one that requires attention in those particular aspects. In addition, the use of digital tools. Adoption of tools cannot just be done lightly. You need to find those tools that are more appropriate, most appropriate, also for the age of the students that are receiving your instruction. Remember that there is a great level of autonomy, so instruction giving, rubrics, many things that probably in the classroom we take for granted in the face-to-face classroom, but that cannot be taken for granted in a remote teaching context. I hope I answer your question. Yes,
thank you very much. That was very comprehensive. So what I'd like to do now is turn to our second clip from the documentary, where you can see the Language for Resilience program in action.
Human displacement in Latin America has been of an enormous impact in the latest years. Language for Resilience provides a concrete answer for non-Spanish speakers so as to provide Spanish classes remotely and through video conference. I'm Joan Duarte. I'm from Colombia. I'm Jackson John from Haiti. When I came to Argentina, I did not have a visa. I had to make a stop in Panama, then another one in Uruguay, and then go through Brazil. After that, I had to take a bus and enter the Argentine territory, more specifically Buenos Aires. There was calling from the British Council looking for teachers. We started developing a 3-level syllabus where the student accessing the platform can have the basic tools to insert socially, researching those situations that migrants and refugees had to work out. For example, tomorrow I have a work interview. How do I do this? I have vocabulary. We have people that speak Arabic, Wolof, Creole, French, English, etc. And we are from very different continents: Africa, the Middle East, the Caribbean, Jamaica. So the lifestyle, what is a joke for one can be a nuisance for another person. What is a greeting for some can have a different meaning, a different culture. We have very different cultures. So through this space where these people gather, we were able to unconsciously learn to manage ourselves, to function at social level, as well as in the communication. We expanded the class modality to a totally virtual to a semi-in-person in certain cases. So we started coordinating with organizations from the civil society that were in touch with the population, with migrants and refugees. And it was in the orientation center where the center leader said to me that there was a person that could be quite helpful. And I met Jackson. I learned and learned and learned. It's a learning space. I learned to facilitate, to teach, because not only did I learn how to teach, but I also learned how they went about it. I learned Spanish, also facilitated by the program. I learned a lot about how to communicate with another person, especially when the other person underwent different experiences, because he or she comes from a different culture or has different abilities.
You've been watching the second clip from our documentary, New Ways of Teaching, which featured the Language for Resilience program, which was run from Argentina. Now, Rob Chatfield, the country director for the British Council Argentina, could you give us a little bit more background to the program and what you think were the main achievements?
Thanks, Graham. Yeah, the background to the program was we decided to fund a pilot program for this in around, I think it was 2018. And we wanted, if possible, to reach, 100 students maybe who were coming from, and again, a lot of the emphasis at the start was because of refugees coming from Syria. But in fact, we had refugees from many, many different countries, from the Democratic Republic of Congo, from Afghanistan, Haiti, lots of different countries. So I think what we managed to achieve, I mean, firstly, we managed to raise the profile through the pilot to get support from the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, for them to get funding to expand the program and ultimately reach over 300 refugees in Argentina. But I think most fundamentally what we achieved was communities of refugees who were able to develop their knowledge of Spanish, interact with each other, support each other in terms of their learning, and of course, insert themselves better into society in Argentina. And I think, you heard from Jackson there, who's from Haiti. There were other people that we work with who ended up getting jobs doing the things that they were trained for in their own countries because they had Spanish, and that was because of the program. And that to me is a pretty amazing achievement.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rob. Just as a follow-up question, I'm sure there'll be some people out there who are listening to this and wondering why the British Council are doing a project that is principally helping the teaching of Spanish, the learning of Spanish. Could you let everyone know why that is? It's a little bit unusual.
Yeah, it's a little bit unusual. I think what it was again, this program started before the pandemic. And at the time, when we were looking at it and we were talking to people, I think the first year we were involved with Migraciones in Argentina as well. And it was basically that we had the technical skills to do the program. At that stage, teachers teaching remotely, teaching, a group of students who are maybe all in individual places, or teachers teaching a group of students remotely who are all in the same place. It wasn't as common as it is now. Now everybody's doing remote teaching. So back at the time, we had not only, I guess, the logistical and operational skills to do it. It was something we were able to implement quite quickly, taking all the learning that we'd had from projects like Ceibal and Inglés. So yeah, it seemed a bit left field for the British Council, but part of the idea was to, build the service up and then really, at the end, hand it over to someone else to do. And it's now being done by an Argentine university. So the program still exists.
Of course. And just one final question before we move to the next clip, the last clip. This program is just one more example of the kind of diverse activities you've been doing from the Remote Teaching Center in Argentina in Buenos Aires, isn't it? Could you speak a little bit more about some of the other projects that you've been involved in related to teaching remotely or teacher training remotely?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we've done all sorts of things going back. I came to the Remote Teaching Center in 2016. So we've done things like teacher training for Iraqi English teachers based in a fairly inaccessible place north of Baghdad, who were not able to get teacher trainers out to them, but they did have an internet connection and a webcam. So we were able to do a week of teacher training with them. We did a week of teacher training to university teachers in Cuba. We did teacher training to a group of teachers in Kazakhstan, a group of teachers in Burma. We've also taught students as diverse as a multilingual group of oil workers in Basra in Iraq, as an example. We've taught business students all around the Americas English. We've taught sort of emergency IELTS English for people who are about to sit their exams. So I think, you know, we've been able to do a whole bunch of things, and what makes me happiest, I guess, is we've been able to share the skills that we've got. You know, many teachers, I mean, hundreds of teachers have passed through the remote teaching center since 2014 when it opened, and all of them have gone away with skills which, when the pandemic hit, suddenly became incredibly useful, not just for them, but in the education system that they were working in. So it's a place that we're very proud of, and we've got a lot of projects that we're also very proud of.
Thank you, Rob. That's quite a diverse set of different projects that you've been involved in. Quite impressive. So I would like to now, apart from encouraging everybody to find out more about the Language for Resilience program by watching the documentary later, I'd like to move to our third and final clip. And that is all about the Coding for Kids project in Colombia.
We are, of course, undergoing the fourth industrial revolution, and we need all Colombians, regardless of their age, of their location, of their prior experience, to have the necessary skills. My name is Paola Maldonado Gonzalez. I'm Colombian, and I'm a teacher of IED in information technology. I'm Omaira. I'm from Colombia. I was born in Bogota. I'm a teacher of the Secretary of Education, and I'm a part of the project Coding for Kids from the British Council. We decided to implement this project from the Minister of Education because we want to narrow the gap information technology. We seek to train teachers, mainly from the public sector, in the development of computational thinking for them to multiply their knowledge with kids. Most of the tools provided were technology tools. Zoom classes, we used Mako, which is a platform that can simulate microbits. And there we were able to work. And thanks to that, we were able to see how programming is carried out through microbits. My first experience as project mentor was a bit stressful, mainly due to the technological part, because the project had to use Zoom. My first experience in class for this training was quite new because it was virtual, but it was very important that from the first class, we were able to connect them with these themes and to show them that it's not that complicated or as complicated as they might think. Hi, teacher, how are you? This is Myra. During the training, I learned pedagogical techniques. I have programming knowledge, as I said, but I didn't have the foundations or the methodology to convey that knowledge. The idea is for girls to get them involved in technology issues. So I was able to bridge that gender gap and to involve girls in computer programming. How can we do that? Allowing them to be leaders of the projects, treating them everybody equal, with no differences, with ample opportunities, so that the language does not have any differences between boys and girls. You can see that here it has different temperature. You have to connect this microbit. Programming is one of the things that students everywhere in the country should learn, because it enables not only access to technology, but improvement of technologies, which is what makes the world go round. It's important for children to start appreciating these type of studies, because from the very little they are told that maths is difficult, for example. This helped me because it made me more organized. It has to it conveys a lot of self-regulation also. You need connectivity. Not all teachers have good connectivity because many of them live and work in rural areas. As to advantages of remote education, discipline, self-discipline in learning, understanding that we do not necessarily need somebody to convey teaching, but by self-teaching ourselves, we can obtain information through different background sources.
So you've been watching the third clip from our New Ways of Teaching documentary, which we will shortly be sharing the link to, which is all about coding for kids, a project that is taking place in Colombia. I'd like to call upon Laura Baragan, the Director of Education Society in Colombia for the British Council, to speak a little bit about the main achievements of coding for kids. Laura.
Sure, Graham, thank you. It's quite emotional to see both our teachers and our mentors in that video. We are very proud as British Council Colombia of everything we've accomplished with this project. So it's hard to pin down just a few achievements, but perhaps I would highlight 4. The first one is the program's reach and sustainability. So we've been implementing this alongside the Colombian government, in particular the National Ministry of Technology and the National Ministry of Education for 4 years now, which for some might seem like not too long, but when you work with governments, it's great to have that sustainability and be able to iterate and improve your interventions. In terms of reach, we've thus far reached 15,000 teachers, just like Paola, the great teacher we just saw. Those include both technology teachers, but also teachers from other STEM areas and primary teachers and teachers from other subject areas as well. By end of year, we expect to reach 20,000 teachers. We've been to all 96 secretaries of education in the country, all 32 departments or states. So we have literally been all over Colombia. We have also reached thus far over 535,000 students. By year end, we expect to reach 1 million Colombian students. And we've also been able to distribute along the country over 67,000 microbits. The microbits are that microcomputers you just saw in the video. These were designed by the BBC back in 2014 to offer younger students an innovative and pedagogical and fun way to get closer to coding. The second achievement, I would say, also mentioned by the teacher, was the use of technology. So in 2020 and 2021, all of our training had to move on to virtual because of the pandemic. That led to a lot of innovations and allowed us to reach a lot more teachers. It is worth saying that our training includes 30 hours of a very robust course that people access via the internet, but it also included, like you saw, synchronous and asynchronous support from mentors. We also were able to create a virtual community of teachers through a Facebook page that currently has over 12,340 teachers that continue to talk about how to implement this in the classrooms. But also more student-facing, what we did was we created an app called Greentick. It's available for anyone in the continent. So if you don't have it, this is the opportunity to invite you all to download it. Just access your Apple Store or your Google Store. And it's a great app designed for 10-year-old students and above. It contains 96 challenges or mini games to foster the basic skills linked to computational thinking. The third achievement I would mention is our monitoring and evaluation. From the beginning, we partnered with Uninorte, Universidad del Norte, a very prestigious university here in Colombia, because we wanted to make sure that it wasn't only about reaching a lot of teachers or students, but the quality of teaching and the quality of the training as well. Thanks to those very serious and comprehensive evaluations, we can now confirm things like there have been statistically significant improvements in teachers' content knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, self-efficacy in computational thinking, and technological self-efficacy. We have, because we've been implementing it for several years now, we can also provide evidence that each year those statistically significant improvements continue to improve. So we're getting better at what we do as well. We created a bespoke classroom observation tool based on Stanley's methodology of snapshots so that we could not only gauge the improvement of teachers after the training, but also see how that was transforming classroom practices. And we can, for example, now confirm that student engagement has improved and that the scaffolding associated with our curriculum and our materials is properly being implemented. The fourth and final highlight I would mention today is the gender perspective, which you also heard from the clip we just saw. So from the very beginning, a big interest of ours was to make sure that the girls were particularly involved in whatever we did in Coding for Kids, but not only the girls, but female teachers. So for example, it's interesting to share that 53% of the teachers we've trained are female teachers. It's also interesting to note through our M&E that the gains in content knowledge are higher in female teachers than in male teachers. We also incorporated within the methodology, which you also heard in the documentary, a lot of content about how teachers could foster gender equality in the classroom. So via our classroom observation tool, we can now confirm that the teachers that go through the training involve both girls and boys in the classroom practices. And also very interesting evidence is that 53% of the challenges that have been played thus far from our Greentick app have been played by girls. So we are very happy about the results, and we continue to emphasize the importance of making sure a gender perspective is always present when talking about coding, STEM, IT, or computational thinking. So in summary, Graham, I would say the 4 big accomplishments are the program's reach, the use of technology, monitoring and evaluation, and our gender perspective.
Wow, that's very impressive, Laura. Those numbers of teachers and students, 20,000 teachers and 1 million students in particular that you mentioned, the reach of the Coding for Kids project, I think is particularly impressive, but everything is really. I have a question for you, Laura, about one of the things that we heard about and you hear about in the documentary, which is computational thinking. Computational thinking, could you explain a little bit more about what that exactly is? Because it doesn't necessarily mean the use of computers, does it?
It doesn't. And thank you for the question, because it has often become a buzzword and it's not that clear what that entails. So rather than trying to create a new bespoke definition, what we use in the program is Jeanette Wing's definition from back in 2010, where she explains that computational thinking is the thought processes involved in formulating problems and their solutions, so that those solutions are represented in a form that can effectively be carried out by an information processing agent. In other words, it's understanding how computers talk, how computers are designed. That includes a lot of important soft skills that are not only important when you program or code, but that are useful for any other practices. Such soft skills include decomposition, pattern recognition, abstraction, algorithmic thinking, debugging. So it's not just about learning to code, it's about developing the critical thinking skills, the thought processes involved in understanding how computers are set up, how computers think. This is now very important, not only for the education sector in Colombia, but in the education sectors in all countries. Just as proof, the PISA assessment this year, the students are currently sitting that exam, includes within its mathematical literacy component, computational thinking. So I believe this is here to stay, and it's very important to understand that coding is not an end in itself, but it's also a manifestation of how good our computational thinking skills are.
Thank you very much, Laura. And thank you to you and to Liliana and to Rob for answering the questions. We've now reached the moment for opening up questions from the audience, and we have had a few questions. I can also see that a lot of people have been sharing links to videos and some comments about their own situation in the chat, which is great. They continue to do that. But if anyone does have any particular questions they want to ask about the clips that we've shared or any of the things our panelists have said, then please do so. I'm going to call upon, sorry, I'm going to look at a question that was asked by Jose Zapata in Peru to any of our panelists who would like to answer it. And Jose's question is about struggling to encourage students to turn on cameras when teaching remotely. So this idea of online learning and teaching and getting students to actually turn on the students. And he says that most students don't do this, and it can be a problem for the teacher during the class. Does anyone of our panelists have any suggestions of how to encourage that?
Graham, maybe
sure.
It's my turn to
Go
answer.
ahead,
Thank you very much. Well, there's one thing that I need to stress in our program in remote teaching with Ceibal. There's a classroom teacher at the other end. So we don't experience that problem. But when we had to go, everybody had to learn from home and teach from home during pandemic, we actually face some of these circumstances at times. And it has to come to classroom management as well. I mean, how the lesson is organized so that students are called upon, that they are engaged. It can be as simple as establishing as a rule during the lesson, but when we're talking about little kids, of course, but when we're talking about older students, it's definitely about the level of engagement managed by the remote teacher. So definitely something that has to be planned, that in the lesson plan has to be anticipated as a potential problem, and a solution has to be thought of. And one of them is, what kind of interaction you expect from your learners during your lesson. If that's when I refer to transferring skills from the traditional classroom. It's not the same. In the traditional classroom, the learner will definitely look other way, get distracted. So think about that. Your student is not turning on the camera. Why? Because they are uninterested, they are distracted, they are not really paying attention. That's one consideration. First. Second, the level of interaction you want to promote within your lesson. And again, what digital tools are you using? I mean, are you having breakout rooms or not? You have to think that it's very tiring to pay attention to the teacher if the lesson is just prescribed for 45 minutes or 50 minutes. So there are many considerations. I'm sorry I don't have one concrete and easy solution to it. There are many aspects to it, but it boils down to class management and planning, in my opinion.
Excellent. Thank you, Liliana. I'd also like to call upon Laura, who in Colombia, there's a wonderful project called English Without Borders, which is an extension of English teaching being carried out by teachers to students at home. Laura, I think, would like to say a little bit about that and with reference to the question that was asked.
Sure. Thank you, Graham. Indeed, this is something we've struggled a lot with in our English Without Borders program, but also even in Coding for Kids in terms of teachers turning on their cameras. So the first consideration, just like Legally was saying, is what sort of interactions we're fostering, whether it is as a teacher or as a mentor. The second thing is we have to accept that in many cases, they're not turning cameras on because of connectivity. So you also have to be creative to get that engagement through the chat. So for example, in our English Without Borders, we saw that even though we lost a lot of face-to-face participation because of the lack of videos, that surprisingly enhanced the writing skills because they had to participate in the chat. And then we also tried to do kind of more pedagogical tricks or stimuli to get people to turn on cameras, whether it was in the microbit, like show what your microbit is like through the LEDs that we saw in the documentary, show your results. And something we found that could be very key for many teachers was that there could be some embarrassment about sharing on your camera because often, especially for vulnerable students, they don't want to share where they live. They might be other family members around. So surprisingly, a good, easy solution was to encourage kids to turn on backgrounds and make fun of that characteristic in Zoom so that they don't feel self-aware of kind of their surroundings. So there are small tricks, but I agree entirely with Lily that the primary goal and the primary way of approaching this challenge is through the methodology and how teachers approach the classroom.
Excellent. Very good tips there, Laura. That's really interesting to hear. I'm going to call upon Rob now. I know, Rob, you've answered a question from Gregorio Martinez in the chat, in the question answer. Let me just, but it would be good for you to maybe say a little bit more about that, because I think your answer is really interesting. So Gregorio asks, he says that he's been teaching online for some time now, and apart from the technical connection issues, which Laura was talking about, the most challenging part of online classes remains getting the students involved 100% of the class. And he asked for advice on that. And you have answered a little bit, Rob, in there, but if you'd like to expand upon that, that would be interesting, I think.
Sure. Thanks, Graham. Look, for me, I remember there was a before and after moment in about 1997 when I observed somebody else's class and realized that they were a master at training their students to learn in their class environment, and I wasn't. And so I embarked on a whole process of reviewing the way in which I trained my students to learn how to do pair work, how to do group work, how to move their chairs, everything. As a teacher, you have to be in control. You have to be in control of your classroom. So the same rules apply in a digital space. And what I found when I've observed teachers is very often they haven't gone through that process of training the students how to behave, being clear about the rules. And of course, this is much more important when you're perhaps teaching adolescent or young learners, having really clear and explicit systems of rules of how it is that you're going to work, how you're going to work together, what's expected of them, because otherwise you come in and people don't know how to behave or what to do. So I know it sounds really obvious, but the time that you invest as a teacher in training your learners to work in the way you want will be very well invested time, and I can't overstate that.
Thank you, Rob. Some very interesting links and some recommended reading being shared. Elianius Paith Concepcion is sharing a book about STEM in the chat, which looks like it's really well worth checking out. A Manifest of Women in STEM. So I think that's quite interesting. And we have a question from Patricia Evelyn Grounds that is all about classroom observation. And Liliana, you've mentioned something about that in the chat in response to Patricia's question. I wondered if you'd like to say a little bit more about maybe the value of observation and how that can take place online, etc. Or Laura, if Laura or Liliana or Rob, whoever wants to jump in first.
Sorry about that. First of all, hi, Pat, and thanks for your question. Yes, at the RTC, the value of observation is key because it's the way we collect data to understand where our teachers are in the process of their development. We use different tools. In our context, I have to remind people we are working in a teaching point. Is a small cubicle classroom, and we observe different ways. We don't observe like in the other context where you walk into the classroom and sit in next to the student and observe the class. Now we use something that is called multi-points, where we also connect to the class, so we are observing remotely as well. The data that we collect is important because we decide how to help teacher develop which areas of the profession and the stage of their development are necessary to address. The tool includes, as I said, there are different tools, but the tool that we use internally includes issues, as I said, the use of material and the different digital tools and how they master that to address issues of learning. Now, I have to say something very important when we do these observations is when the teacher uses a tool, for example, there's so much attention that has to be put on, the students, that are on camera. It's a classroom that the teacher in the Argentinian context is looking at, in the remote teaching center. So you have the classroom on one hand, you have your tool being used that the students have to see, and you have got the class teacher. So there are various elements that the teacher has to juggle with at the same time. So if you allow me, Pat, if you, I know your email address, I'll send you some ideas now, but I can share with a wider audience. Basically is understand your context, design your tool that is appropriate to that context, in this case, remote teaching, and think outside of the box, because the context is not the same.
Thank you very much, Liliana. Laura, I've got a question for you actually related to coding for kids and about STEM education in general that has become more important for countries in the Americas and elsewhere recently. Why do you think that is the main reason? What's the main reason for that, do you think?
It's a great question. As I was saying before, STEM coding, computational thinking has become somewhat of buzzwords and fashionable. But I do believe there are very important reasons of why this has now gotten all the attention from the education sector, but also from the IT sector. I would mention probably two. The first one is macroeconomical perspective. You heard that from the deputy minister in the clip we saw, which is the big human talent gap that exists. So, for example, just in Colombia, there are studies that prove that, for example, there are up to 35,000 jobs in the IT sector that are not being able to be filled by Colombian talent. This gap, according to people like McKinsey and companies like McKinsey, could reach up to 265,000 jobs in 2025. So it is very important that from the school, we are fostering not only the interest, but also the skills associated to be able to fill those gaps. But also it is very important, and here's where the UK expertise comes into our Coding for Kids. It is very important to understand that computational science or computational thinking and STEM is something that is useful for anyone and everyone. Even if I don't want to become a systems engineer or an expert programmer or coder, these are skills that are now part of the 21st century skills, that by doing programs in computational thinking, I am also fostering other skills like critical thinking, collaboration, creativity. So that is why, for example, in our program, we have primary school teachers that are taking the training. We don't always use the microbit from the very beginning. So there are a lot of unplugged activities that don't even require coding, but don't even require technology. So something like decomposition, pattern recognition, you can easily do with primary school kids. And in that sense, the English curriculum for computing science, which was launched in 2014, is a great example of how this has become a cross-curricular activity, also a subject-driven activity, obviously, but we do use a lot of the efforts that especially the English education system has made in the past few years, where they have frameworks to gauge student progress, where they have great training from peer-to-peer schools, where they developed technologies like the microbits to help that process. So I think it is clear that computational thinking, STEM, IT is not only key for the future, but also for our present. And as education systems, we need to respond to that with very rigorous teacher training programs to upskill them to be able to cater to these needs.
Yes, that's really good. I certainly wish, it sounds like such a good opportunity. I certainly wish I'd had that opportunity when I was at primary school. And I think the benefits will be amazing for those kids who are going to, when they grow up. I'm going to ask Rob a question that has just come to mind about the Language Resilience Program, which I was thinking about when you were talking about that, Rob, and it's about the curriculum and materials for refugees, because that, when refugees are learning a language, it's very different from a general language curriculum and materials for learning a language for general reasons, isn't it? That's the case, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we started looking at the curriculum in terms of what we were going to do, a lot of it was done very interactively with with the refugees themselves, in terms of, you know, any good teacher is going to do a needs analysis with their students, but doing needs analysis with the groups, it was very clear that they needed what I would regard as emergency language. So it's all functional language, it's all task-based. It's, you know, how to make an appointment, how to, you know, what to say when you're making a phone call with somebody, you know, how to resolve an issue with, you know, with your rent and things like this. So very, very practical day-to-day things, which, you know, you might not see if you were learning English as a foreign language or Spanish as a foreign language. You might not see such things in the textbook at all, you know. So it was very, very much, let's look at the functional areas of language that these people need in order to be able to integrate themselves into society. And they were great at producing that and giving us that, you know, I you know, got a terrible problem, need to go to a dentist, I've got no vocabulary to explain what's going on. So really very much focusing on functional language and focusing on repeated needs analysis, and almost designing like micro syllabuses to really help them get going and get them learning. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob. And one final question for Liliana. That again, it came to mind when you were talking, Liliana, about the type of remote teaching that you're doing on the Sabal Inglés project, which involves all of the students actually in the classroom while the teaching is going on. And that is very different from the remote teaching that is happening on English Without Borders, for example, or in other contexts where the children are all in their separate homes, the teacher is at home, the home-based teaching model. Which do you think is most difficult for or more different from for the teacher? What are the main differences, and is one easier for a teacher than the other?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I don't think they are easier. They are just very different. In our context, it's all the students with the teacher. And so class management is facilitated. And as Juan in the video, the classroom teacher mentioned, the lessons are separated into A, B, and C. So what you see, and what Laura mentioned as well in when she was answering a question about, you know, how to address these issues of class management, is definitely in the planning. So the methodology that we use is very different. So I think, again, the key is to adapt, to select the most appropriate methodology to the context. In Ceibal, the Remote Teaching Center program, we separate the lessons into A, B, C. A is the remote teacher, B, C is the classroom teacher. But that's the one context. To answer your question concretely, I think that both modalities have got advantages and disadvantages. If all the students are at home, the problem is precisely what the teacher was asking. How do you keep students, how do you help students or motivate students to keep their cameras on? In the case of children, when we were working in pandemic and our context changed and we had to send everybody home and everybody was learning from home, the parents had to be engaged. And if you see, this is what, just to mention, the video was recorded during pandemic, and Flor mentioned in her participation in the clip, she says, are you parent ready to help? Because so the parent took the role of the classroom teacher, and it was important to involve the parent. So what I want to get at is, if you have to teach students based at home, like we did in pandemic, make sure you have very clear ways of managing the lesson and bring other people on board. If they are children, definitely bring on the parents. And if they are adults, prior to teaching, there should be a conversation on how you're going to conduct yourself during the lessons and what objectives you want to reach. So more, easier or more difficult than the other, I think we need to understand new ways of teaching have to adapt to the context. We need to address particular, I wouldn't say problems, just needs, and find the right solution according to the context. So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, very well said, Liliana. And I think we're running out of time. So I would just like to say thank you very much to all of our panelists and to all of you who have found the time to join us today, listen in and watch the clips from the documentary. We hope that later today or sometime soon, you will find the time to actually go and watch the full 30-minute documentary, which will be on the link that we've just shared in the chat. That will be available very soon, if not already. Now, what I would like to do is also ask you to complete a satisfaction survey, which I think is also going to be shared with you on the chat. We would love to hear about what you think about this kind of events. For future events that we would like to organize, we're very happy to adapt them according to the feedback that we get. I think we're doing this for teachers, so we'd like to hear more about what you think about this, and any comments would be gratefully received. Now, this webinar has also been recorded. If you have found it enjoyable and interesting, which I hope you have, then please recommend it to your colleagues, and you can always go back and watch it again if there is a bit of the the webinar that you miss. You have the chance of going and seeing it again, etc. Now, I'd also finally just like to invite you to the second edition of our New Ways of Teaching live events. This year, we are going to be streaming recordings that were made from during the BBALT conference, which is held every February, annually online at the moment. And we will be starting with that on June the 30th. And then every last Thursday in the next 7 months, we'll have another recording that you'll live stream. The live stream will be accompanied by the ability for everyone to connect to each other and chat at the same time. An expert will be there to be able to answer any of your questions as well. There'll be a certificate available for anyone who watches the recording and/or attends the live stream. So I think it'll be a lot of fun. And then finally, we also preparing some lesson plans and activities that go with the recordings and the live streams that you can download and put into practice into your classroom. So we're very excited about that offer and hope that you will definitely join us on June the 30th, and then every Thursday of the month, the last Thursday of every month in the future. So thank you very much again, and we hope to see you on another occasion. Bye-bye for now.